All right, we are going to complete the best of series with the Winnipeg Jets, which means the Atlanta Thrashers are on the board, and they have to be. The Atlanta Thrashers, without the return to Atlanta, you don't get a return to Winnipeg. There hasn't been any other team that's been moved. Expansion would not have looked at Winnipeg ahead of Vegas. Vegas was on the NHL's radar. So without the Thrashers, you don't have the Jets, so the Thrashers are on the board, and all the Thrashers players went to the Jets and all that other wonderful stuff. And I have to throw that in when I do this because I know there are people who get upset and we're not the Thrashers. I never said they were, or else I would take the Thrashers logo and stick it right there. They are the Jets. But again, because Atlanta had inept ownership and they lost their building, we end up with the Winnipeg Jets. And when you look at the career leaders for the Winnipeg Jets, you do see an Atlanta Thrashers flavor to that. Starting with leading them in points, Blake Wheeler, 651 points. That's a lot of points. Kovalchuk leads them in all-time goals, and of course that's from Atlanta, 328. But Little leads the team in scoring among those that are with Winnipeg, who also played with Atlanta, 217. Now, Line A will reach that level. As long as Line A stays in Winnipeg long enough, he'll reach probably 400, maybe 500 goals. Line A's a special goal scorer who this year learned to become an all-around player. And I think he's better going forward than he was last season. Now, Wheeler also leads the team in career assists with 437. So 437 assists for Blake Wheeler. Penalty minutes, Thorburn, 832 penalty minutes for Thorburn. Power play goals, Kovalchuk, the all-time leader there with 115. So again, that's the Atlanta side of it. Brian Little, 58, the all-time leader in power play goals. That will change because Scheifele, Line A are going to end up ahead of those numbers. But what it also represents, too, is this is not a team that's had a lot of consistent success. 2 consecutive seasons, 2018 and 2019 playoff appearances. And it looked like they might make it in 2020. They might not. It would be sad if they didn't make it in 2020 and we see the all-time record as still being 2. That's sad because last year was the first time they ever had back-to-back playoff seasons. But it does look like Winnipeg, of all of the teams that I've talked about, we're on the 31st. I think Winnipeg's one of the teams with a brighter future than some of the others because they kind of tore apart that blue line at the end of last year and still stayed in the hunt. So on the honorable mentions for the all-time best, Scheifele has to be there. Scheifele eventually will be the points leader, I think, in the all-time history of this franchise. Line A, absolutely. If we're looking at the Atlanta side, you've got Slava Kozlov, yes. You've got Marian Hossa, also a yes. Dustin Byfuglien, who played for both Atlanta and then Winnipeg. Byfuglien, pretty big deal. And then this year happened, and I think when we look back on Byfuglien's career, if this is the end of it, and eventually there's a career video coming with Dustin Byfuglien's name on it, I think we'll remember him as a pretty big, tough defenseman who kind of did a little bit of everything really, really well. And, Toby Enstrom, who played for both Atlanta and Winnipeg, and Andrew Ladd, who also played for both the Thrashers and the Jets. So it is an interesting list of players that, again, some of these guys will straddle both teams, thus Atlanta being here. Wins leader, if we're going to get into goaltending, Andrei Pavlik. 152 wins. And that was, again, Atlanta and Winnipeg. Save percentage, Connor Hellebuck leads there with a 917. And Hellebuck looked like he might be on pace for a Vezina this year. We'll see whether or not that actually ends up happening. Shots against, Pavlik, 10,984 shots against. Shutouts, Connor Hellebuck, 20 career shutouts as a member of the Winnipeg Jets. So Hellebuck will eventually be the guy who's on all of this. He'll have the wins, he'll have the shots against, and everything. But right now, Pavlik is still on the board. And then when you look at the honorable mentions, not a lot of goaltenders for Winnipeg/Atlanta that put up great numbers, and you could argue were among the best. It really is Hellebuck and Pavlik. Lettinen had a decent run, sort of, and then he ends up going to Dallas. He looked like damaged goods when he went to Dallas, but he had a pretty good run with Dallas. And Johan Hedberg. So Moose, in his time with Atlanta, memorable. And of course, what's interesting with Hedberg is he's known as Moose because he had his Manitoba Moose mask on when he was called up during his initial call up. And of course, the team that he ends up playing for, Atlanta, ends up moving back to Winnipeg. But Hedberg never played for the Winnipeg Jets second time around. That's too bad, because that would have been a nice completed circle for him to Manitoba Moose and then Winnipeg Jets as well. So yeah, their all-time best, it is going to be a list of players from this generation. This is where the Winnipeg Jets, as they're constituted right now, is the best that the franchise has ever looked. Now, their best team, 2017-2018, I discussed this in my recent video on teams that didn't win the Stanley Cup. They were probably the best not to win it. And for my money, in 2017-2018, they were the best team that didn't win the Stanley Cup. Just their overall roster, their numbers, they were fantastic that year. And that was their most points with 114. So they were really quite good, and I know that video's caused a lot of discussion, which is how those videos are supposed to work. And I get why people would want to pick other teams, but for me, they were the best team that didn't win the Cup that year. Now, again, as I said, their consecutive playoff years, 2018 and 2019 being the tops. Most wins in their career as a franchise against Florida. Keep in mind, from when they were in Atlanta, that's where a large portion of their history was played, was in that division. Florida, they've beaten 50 times. Points percentage, they like Vegas. Is there another team that likes Vegas? 688 winning percentage versus Colorado. They have a 615, so I didn't want to just have Vegas. Anytime Vegas shows up on the board, I like to have other teams up there because Vegas, it's a small sample size. Goals for against Florida, 299. So they like playing Florida, apparently. Goals for per game, Vegas shows up here, 3.63 goals per game against Vegas. Against Florida, 3.25. Goals against, we finally don't have a team from the 80s expansion or 90s expansion and beyond. Vancouver is the team they've got the best goals against, 2.41, which is probably much lower than that since they became the Winnipeg Jets again. The Winnipeg Jets like playing Vancouver, is my point. They really seem to like playing against Vancouver. Now, notable captains, Wheeler, notable captain there, of course. Ladd, Kovalchuk, obviously. Scott Mellanby, and I mentioned him in my favorites list of favorite Florida Panthers yesterday. Mellanby was a good pick for the Atlanta Thrashers. Good player for expansion teams. I need to do a career video on him as well. Kelly Buchberger was their first ever captain as the Atlanta Thrashers. And yeah, so the Winnipeg Jets / Atlanta, it's a history that's been iffy, and yet right now it looks much, much brighter than it did when they were in Atlanta. Although when they had Hossa, they had Savard, they had Kovalchuk, there were some good players there, but it was a matter of sustaining it. So 2007, they made the playoffs and got swept in the first round. That was the only time Atlanta made the playoffs. Now, best coach, Paul Maurice. I don't see how I don't go with Paul Maurice as best coach. I know there's always going to be that debate whenever the Winnipeg Jets are struggling. Debates about whether or not to keep Paul Maurice are going to be front and center. GM, Kevin Cheveldayoff, because absolutely. They've had other GMs along the way, but Kevin Cheveldayoff's been their best GM as a franchise between both Atlanta and Winnipeg. Is that faint praise? Maybe. But again, Chevy's done a good job of putting the team together. For instance, when Trouba leaves and he adds Pionk, that looked like a smart move to me even at the time. And it turned out to be even better than I thought it was at the time. And yeah, smart move overall. So those are your bests there. Now, the he was a Jet category is short because, again, the team's only been back for, a little less than a decade. Paul Stastny, easy to forget that Paul Stastny was a Jet. Ole Jokinen, kind of easy to forget Ole Jokinen was a Jet, one of the teams he went through. And Kyle Wellwood. Kyle Wellwood, of course, kind of resurrected his career with the Jets, but it would be easy to forget him outside of, he plays in Vancouver and he played in Toronto, and those being the two places he's most remembered for. Now, the he was a Thrasher category actually has a bit of a longer list. You have Keith Tkachuk. Yep, Keith Tkachuk was a Thrasher briefly and then left. Chris Chelios. Chris Chelios was an Atlanta Thrasher. Matthew Schneider, also an Atlanta Thrasher. So Montreal Canadiens players who won Stanley Cups with Montreal. Peter Bondra, really easy to forget Peter Bondra was a member of the Atlanta Thrashers. And Mark Recchi. So Mark Recchi, Yep. And again, some of this was when they were trying to put together a winning franchise in 06-07. Part of that was with the idea of selling Kovalchuk on the idea of staying in Atlanta. And Kovalchuk leaving Atlanta is part of the reason that you end up seeing Atlanta move, but really that was just more poor ownership and not having a building. You can't play hockey without a building. You could try, but it's not going to work. So you can't have hockey without a building, and that's what happened with Atlanta. And then they ended up in Winnipeg because when Winnipeg had the MTS Center that was all good to go, they'd let the NHL know they were ready. It's the same thing Houston's got going for them right now. Houston as an owner, he's let them know I have money, I'm willing to spend it, and I got a building. Meaning that if we reach a point where a team has to move again in the NHL, Houston's going to be first in line. There you go. The all-time best of the Winnipeg Jets. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. And remember, as I've been saying, stay home if you can. Stay safe when you can't, or when you can as well. And hey, remember to keep your hands nice and clean. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.